The Miami running game, I think, is going to be a key for the Hurricanes' success this year. I think there's a lot to still be improved upon. Last year, after they finished 10th in the ACC, they've not had a top five rushing offense in the ACC since 2010. It's been a long time. Mario Cristobal jumps on board, wants to improve the running game. It's just not where it needs to be. 128 yards per game last year, 3.7 yards per carry, 12 touchdowns, which is the lowest rushing total touchdowns since 1988. Certainly, they've got to improve on a lot of different areas. Red zone, Miami 11th in the ACC, 1.8 yards per carry, 140 some yards in the red zone. So Miami's got to improve in the running game. And I know that the offensive line has improved, but David, we're going to get into the backs. Who's going to lead this team? What does it look like? Can they improve? How much can they improve? Or is it going to be much of the same? But just your initial thoughts on running game as we get into this here.
Yeah, I think you touched on it. To me, it boils down to two areas that they have to be better at. Red zone. I think you got to count on your backs to find the end zone. And then they got to do a better job of generating explosive plays. Last year, Miami only had 9 runs that went for at least 20 yards, which was 112th in the country. I would assume the majority of those 20-yard runs came against Bethune-Cookman. And then you look at the red zone numbers. You alluded to it, 1 point something yards per carry. That's alarming. You also look at just the red zone touchdowns, the rushing touchdowns, 48 trips, only 12 rushing touchdowns. 6 of those came against Bethune-Cookman. And then you go and look, Chris, at ACC opponents. Miami made 25 trips into the red zone against ACC teams. Only 1 red zone rushing touchdown, the memorable 2-yard rushing touchdown from Jalen Knighton against Georgia Tech. So a lot of areas to improve. To me, the bottom line is how much does the offensive line changes help kind of get the running game going in some ways? And also, too, particularly in the red zone and short areas, like I am a believer that running backs find their own yards, go get their own yards. And so this group this year needs to be better at that.
And to be top five, you're looking at a roughly, over the years, it's about 190 yards per game, 80, 180, 190. That's essentially what's going to be take to be a top five. Certainly, that would be a huge jump. You touched on it with conference games and the red zone stuff. Only 103 yards per game in conference games, ranked 11th. So Miami brings back Henry Parrish. He led the team in rushing last year, 600 yards, 4.7 yards per carry. The next 3 backs that led the team in rushing are all gone. They do return a couple guys in Don Chaney Jr. and Trevante Citizen coming off injuries. I'm curious your thoughts on those guys. Can Miami expect anything from them? And then also they bring in 3 new guys. A.J. Allen, a transfer out of Nebraska, 190 yards. Not very many, but 5.8 yards per carry. I know Nebraska certainly was not happy to see him go. They thought he could be a productive player. And David, we've talked to people from Miami. They like what they see in AJ. They think he's got a bright future. And I think it's going to be interesting to see how he gets implemented in. He's not a big guy, but certainly he's got some speed there and can make plays. And then they bring in a couple freshmen, Mark Fletcher, a guy that I know you're real high on it, and we're going to talk about him. And then Christopher Johnson with the speed. So you get the size with Fletcher, the speed with Johnson, some elite speed there. And maybe those guys can kind of help the 2 areas you just talked about. Red zones touchdowns with Fletcher possibly, and then Chris Johnson with those breakaway, those big runs. So maybe those new guys are really going to improve in addition to the offensive line that you just touched on.
Yeah, no, to me, like, in my opinion, Henry Parrish is best used in a complementary role. I don't think he can be your workhorse back. I think we saw him, have some durability issues last year in that role. I think he missed 2 games for various reasons, durability reasons. And, I just think he's a guy that's better used 10 to 15-ish carries, maybe use some in the passing game as well. I think when we look back at this season, the top 3 running backs in terms of attempts, carries, will be A.J. Allen, Mark Fletcher, and Henry Parrish. I think that'll end up being a top 3. I am curious how they get to that point, because I'd be surprised if Miami starts the season that way. I think they'll give Don Chaney Jr. an opportunity to show he's healthy. He's had some really bad injury luck, and he deserves the chance to show that he's back and healthy, because I think pre-injuries, there was some intriguing talent there with his physical traits. And yeah, I think, Chris Johnson with his speed, I think he's more of like a gadget player on offense at this point of his career, but give him some chances on kickoff return to show what he can do. And if he makes plays in that phase, maybe you give him more looks as a running back. But to me, I kind of go into this season thinking, hey, it's going to be AJ Allen, Mark Fletcher, and Henry Parrish. I'm curious, Chris, do you think there's going to be a workhorse back, or is it going to be kind of a running back by committee approach this year?
I think it's going to be a running back committee in the sense of what you just alluded to, that what it looks like early in the year might not be what it looks like later in the year. I could see a guy, whether it's injury or performance, or even some of these new guys getting implemented. Fletcher and Johnson, for example, weren't here in the spring. AJ Allen either. These guys are just getting here. So it might take them some time. We saw this last year, new coaching staff, but it's still Cristobal. There's the head coach. So maybe it just takes some time to essentially trust these guys. So maybe we're not going to see those guys as much as you might think early on. So I think that's going to be a thing. I think the running back carries the way we look at it late in the year. I think it's going to be similar in that sense too. Maybe a guy does earn it later on in the year in terms of being one of those lead backs, but I think it's going to start out. Parrish is going to get the majority of the carries. I do think Chaney's going to be in the mix. We've not seen Chaney, have a season really where he has been completely healthy, completely reliable in a couple of years. He's only played 3 games the last 2 years. He went through a stretch, missing 21 straight, does get that last game in last year, gets a couple carries, but we've not seen Chaney, be that reliable guy. 4.6 yards per carry over his career when he's been in there. And I think this is the big year for Don. Year 4, he's just looking to be, have one of these years where he's healthy, productive. And I think we're going to see if Don Chaney's going to be reliable this year, a guy that they can count on, and moving forward. Because if it doesn't work out this year for Don, I think you've got these other newcomers. You're going to be looking at a Fletcher and a Chris Johnson, even AJ Allen, a lot differently next year if they get a full year in. And I think this is a chance for Don to stay out in front of those guys. He's been in the program. He understands what it takes. But I think those guys will pass him up. Certainly, if he does not get on the field, does not have production early on, I think he's going to get his opportunities. I'm curious. I'm still hesitant. I've not been as high on Don coming into his career at Miami as most people. So, but I'm curious because I do think he's going to get opportunities, and I don't want to make light of what's happened in the last couple of years. It's certainly been difficult for him. I know he wants to be out there, but I remember in fall camp last year, he just didn't trust it. And I think that's going to be the big thing in fall camp this year. He's got to trust his knee if he's completely healthy and really take on everything that needs to be had, go through everything as a running back and really take control of it. I think he's the player to watch in fall camp because I think he's going to get the opportunities. There is some potential. He just has to rise to the occasion there essentially and stay healthy.
Yeah, and Trevante Citizen, another guy coming off an injury that's interesting because what's he going to look like? We don't know yet, right? He sustained a knee injury during fall camp last year. He was a guy that looked like, he was trending to be kind of this year's Mark Fletcher last year, right? Like he was going to be a guy that probably received a lot of carries in the second half of the season, didn't get that opportunity because of the injury, had a setback, it seemed like, in January-ish. And so we'll see when fall camp starts what his level of readiness is. I am curious to see too what type of impact this new look offensive line can make in the run game. You had Matt Lee, you had Javian Cohen, you had Francis Mauigoa, the true freshman. These are big physical guys. I think last year, particularly in the second half of the season when the offensive line started dealing with injuries, there was a lot of undersized guys, a lot of finesse type of offensive linemen that have a hard time just moving people, if we're being honest. So I do think the changes on the offensive line are also going to have a big impact positively on the run game this year.
And they have to. If Miami's going to improve their running game, essentially Parrish is what he is. He's coming into his 4th season. He kind of is what he is. Chaney and Citizen, if they're on the field, if they're healthy, but they're kind of, so we don't know exactly what they're going to be like. And for just to touch on Citizen, since you brought him up, I was obviously very high on him last year. I thought he could be productive, but now I think he's just fighting a really uphill battle, not just individually, but they've got other guys they can go to. They're not going to wait around coaches, not just at Miami, other places. They're not going to wait around for Citizen to get healthy. They've got other guys that are going to get opportunities. I think all 5 of the other guys are capable of being productive. So Citizen has to get right and just kind of get ready. And essentially, whenever he is ready, whenever he does get on the field, really make the most of those opportunities, because I think they're going to be few and far between, especially early on, because they've got other guys, depending on the games, the schedule, and things like that. But the offensive line, as you mentioned, I think they have a chance. To me, they've been the group that can improve the most from last season, and I think it is going to translate with the running backs. I think they're going to be able to create holes, whether it's stretch plays or if they're going to go inside runs, whatever it might be. I think this offensive line has the potential. I think they certainly will deliver in providing plenty of opportunities for the running game. Like I said, I think they can stay inside, kind of beat the lineup, the defensive line and linebackers. If they get outside, I think these guys can move. I think that's the thing with Sampson and Francis in particular. These freshmen, I think they can move for young guys that are big. And I think that's going to help them, really create some good running lanes for the backs. And I think my overall takeaway with the backs is be available and be ready. And that's not necessarily health wise. I think make sure the new guys, make sure you understand the playbook, make sure you're ready to go. And I think that's going to be the big thing with Mark and Chris, because they got there over the summer. AJ's new too, but AJ's been in the college game. So they've got to be available. And I think that's the big number one thing that Henry has done well over his career. He has missed games, as you touched on a little bit, but he's a guy that, even though he's not the biggest guy, he's been available. And I think there's no question he's going to be the guy going into fall camp, going into the season. And I think it's going to be up to everybody else to be available, but also more productive. Otherwise, I think it's going to be Henry's show once again this year.
And I'm excited about Mark Fletcher and just the way his season will progress. I think there's a big opportunity for him to earn a role early on as a short yardage back, converting first downs and scoring touchdowns in the red zone, as we alluded to earlier. That was a weakness for Miami the last couple years, quite frankly. And Mark's a big guy, 6'1", 225, carries it well. He needs to be that short yardage back that keeps the chains moving or gets Miami into the end zone. If he could be that guy, his role's going to grow from there. And Miami might have something special in him. We'll see.
And to your point with Mark, and we'll wrap this up, to me, of the six, I think he's got the biggest potential to be the best of the six. That's the guy that I'm looking forward to. Whether it happens this year or next year, that remains to be seen. But I think of the six, I think he has the one. I think he's the one to have the biggest potential, and it'll be interesting to see how he does in fall camp. Thanks again for watching. For everybody, drop in the comments below, which one are you most excited about? What position group would you like to see us focus on next? Definitely thanks for watching.